Hello, everybody. Greetings, Vitanya in Ukrainian to all of our freedom-loving people here for the Restricted Handling podcast. I'm here in Kyiv, again in the studio of the location studio with a great team that we worked with a couple of months ago to do another podcast from here. And we have a wonderful guest today. His call sign is Artist. He's an officer in the 3rd Corps. We'll let him talk a little bit about his background. But before we start, I want everyone to know that's watching that we were awoken this morning by more Russian attacks across Ukraine, one of the largest air attacks that the Russians have conducted against this country as part of their mass aggression and attempts to terrorize the Ukrainian people. Here in Kyiv, my understanding is that 7 people were killed in the attacks. They were struck with Shahed drones, cruise missiles, and larger missiles. Ukrainian air defense units, which have done an incredible job defending the country, are stretched and were unfortunately unable to stop all of those threats. And among those that have been killed and injured are children. So this is just another example of how the Russians are waging a war that is not respecting any terms of any kind of rules of war that people in the West might understand. So I just want to take a moment to say a prayer for all those families that have been impacted and for the Ukrainian people who continue to fight against an aggressor that is trying to take away their culture, their language, their ability to decide who should lead them, and their dignity. And the Ukrainian people are not going to let that happen. And I hope all of us in the West, especially in the United States, my country, we will continue to support Ukraine and maybe even increase our support for this country, which deserves it greatly. So, kicking off with our podcast, our guest today is Artist. He's an officer in the Air Defense Unit in the 3rd Corps. I'm going to let him talk a little bit about what he does, and we'll have a little back and forth. But my understanding is, Artist, that you were not in the military until 2014. You were actually an artist. You were studying art and design. Well, welcome to the program. Thank you for taking time. I know you had a long drive.
Thank you.
To get here. And Artist just told me before we started how the Russians destroyed his car, which is unacceptable. Nice Mercedes, so we're going to make him pay for that. I'm sure Artist and his teammates are already doing that. Artist, tell us about yourself a little bit.
I was born in Odessa in 1991, peaceful city. Planned just to want to live my peaceful life. So I have almost, understanding of what I want for this life. And it was actually a change in 2014. So since 2014, I would say my life is not my plan.
You were, first of all, for those of you that don't know, Odessa is a gorgeous city on the Black Sea. It's incredible history. Many Americans don't know this, but some of our greatest comedians in the United States trace their roots to Odessa. Many great artists, my understanding is, are probably the most famous, and in my opinion, greatest American musician, Bob Dylan. His family came from Odessa. Woody Allen, Neil Simon. So there's a whole list of Americans that come from Odessa.
I know about the grandmother of Sylvester Stallone. She also from
Odessa.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful city. And you studied art, you studied design, and you were working as a sculptor.
Yep. Before
2014. And like many Ukrainians, you had to give up your dream, something that you loved. You told me you really enjoyed being a sculptor, doing restoring sculptures, but you had to give that up to defend your country.
Yeah.
How difficult was that? And from time to time, when you're fighting, when you're on duty, do you ever just wish you could go back and do art?
No, I was 23 when I volunteered first time. It was during 2014. I wouldn't say it was some hard decision. I mean, in my opinion, it was the only right decision. So my parents told me so. There was a lot of things I believed in. So this decision wasn't so hard, but who told me that time that it would take half of my life or maybe all of my life? So yeah, that's where it goes.
Right. You also mentioned that at some point you worked in China.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you doing artwork there, design work? Or?
Yeah, it was design of interiors mostly, and design for one big company.
When you think about the fact that the Chinese have been supporting the Russians and selling a lot of equipment and armaments to the Russians, do you ever wonder the Chinese people that you knew, that you work with in China, what they think about this, whether they understand how their country is funding basically this war.
Lived and worked there for 3 months, and I would say they are completely different people. They live different in completely different way. They think in not as our own. So I wouldn't say they support anyone. Their strategical thinking,
Mm-hmm.
it's about China, not about to support anyone on this planet. It's commercial, only commercial part for them. I mean, they
Business.
support business. Yes,
Business.
only business.
Do you think that the Chinese respect the Russians and see the Russians as equals
No,
culturally? Do you
no,
think that they want to have a real strategic alliance with Russia, or do you think they're using Russia
no.
for
Of course,
their...
no. It's a part of thinking of Europeans, Americans as well. We want everything here and now. It's a part of our thinking, but it's not about the Chinese because they could think in, far ahead in long terms. So they not respect Russia in any way,
Mhm.
and they just don't need to destabilize the situation by force right now. What for? Because why you should take some kind of offensive deeds if you can just wait for 20 years, maybe 50 years, and whatever, but you will have your result.
Right. Someone told me recently that a Chinese official told him that that the Chinese were very happy to see Russia exhaust itself,
Also,
right?
of course.
And then eventually take control of what is Russia today. Let's talk about we've interviewed several of your colleagues from the Third Corps. I do want to ask you a question. The commander of the Third Corps, we were talking before this podcast started. You talked about how unique he is as a thinker and as a leader.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about Andriy Biletsky and what he's accomplished?
In 2014, when we have this first wave of a big war, actually, it's not some kind of a different campaign. It's only the first step of this big war we have right now. I'm looked for a regiment I want to go in. So few of my friends, so they already were in Azov. And when I spoke with them, they told me you should go here because our leader, our commander, he thinks and he don't consider us as meatbags. So you should go here. I make the decision. I came to Azov, and great decision.
Mm-hmm.
Because since there I follow him, and as I told you before, I saw a lot of times how he create something, I mean great things from nothing.
Right.
And this you have to have some very unique talent for it.
My understanding is that the Third Corps is maybe the most successful, one of the most successful combat units in the Ukrainian military, and that you've been inflicting extensive damage on the Russians as they try and seize
Yeah.
more territory from your
We're
country.
doing our best. But for me, it could be considered as a propaganda. But yes, I would also, from my own opinion, I would also say that the Third Corps is one of the most successful regiments in Ukraine.
And you're doing air defense for the
Right
Third
now,
Corps
yes.
right now.
Yeah.
How long have you been in that position?
A year and a half.
We talk a lot now in the U.S. about the drones, the FPV threat. We've seen in the Gulf that we were
Yes.
probably unprepared for what was coming at us from the Iranians, and our Israelis partners are now facing the same problem in Lebanon from Hezbollah.
Yes. Yes.
How do you see, as an air defense commander, are the Russians good in the drone space? We hear about Rubicon, we hear about these different units they've created. We know the Ukrainians are very good, and I want to talk about that a little bit. Some of the latest reporting we're hearing, but are the Russians? Well, how do you assess the Russian capabilities, their equipment, and their tactics?
You should never underestimate your opponent. They are our enemies, and we would like to destroy them completely. But you cannot, lie to yourself. They are pretty good. They have their own problems. Which is connected with their, huge war machine. They have problems with understanding what for. But let us be honest, in modern war, Ukrainians and Russians are the most experienced soldiers in the world right now. Because this war, it's terrible and so on, but also it's such, machine of evolution. And since both of us trying to find the most effective way to destroy each other, so we also have ways to countermeasure each other.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, they real powerful. They learning also, so you cannot say they, it's like in some media you may read or hear that they barbarians, savages. No, they also learn and also learn fast.
Right. That's a great point. I say that all the time, that Russians learn, they make a mistake once, they don't make it again. So you better take advantage of the opportunity when you have it. So air defense, you're doing tactical air defense. So you're providing air defense support for the different units on the front.
Yes, yeah. All the forces which are the part of Third Army Corps.
So the entire front is your area of responsibility.
Yes.
Some of your colleagues in other units have told me that it's not just about one system. It's got to be integrated systems.
Yes, of course.
And electronic warfare has become very important. How would you describe it? I mean, how do you manage all that?
You cannot consider any war, as a parts. It's all the time. It's only the complex. So you have to understand the distances where our enemy could reach. They are actually the units which were against what type of munition they have, and so on, so on. So you have to also understand how to create your counteroffensive measures. In the few steps. So it depends on the depth of the front line and of the type of materials which they use.
And generally, what is the depth now of the front line? Because it's not a static line.
Different. It different even if we consider all the front line. Ukrainian front line, Ukrainian Russian front line. I was in different part of it, so I would say that even you have different dynamics of war on a different part of this front line. Because when I was in Zaporizhia, they have a completely different war. So it depends. It depends.
Can you explain that a little bit? What's different about Zaporizhia front from, say, Kharkiv or Sumy? Or
Mostly for now on, a lot of pressure. We in Kharkiv Oblast, a lot of pressure. They have, they use also really a lot of UAVs which use optical wire.
mm-hmm.
A lot of it, and it's a problem because since they created until now, you don't have an effective countermeasure for it, because any electric won't work. So you have to destroy it, by some, weapon, only weapon.
Right.
Yes. And the depths, which was started about 10 kilometers, right now can be 35 kilometers, sometime about 50. Also dynamic of usage, because in Kharkiv Oblast, you have a lot of UAVs which trying to destroy our troops, forces, and logistics. In Zaporizhia, I saw completely different dynamics. They mostly use CAB and barraging missiles, but I never saw such amount of UAVs which use optical wire as on our road.
So the Cobb, for our listeners, a Cobb, that's a guided bomb, right? These are they're being dropped by aircraft, correct? Do you think there's a lot of talk now that and I'm glad to see that you guys are now acquiring the Gripen from Sweden.
Yes.
Do you think that will help manage the threat from the Cobb? Because my understanding is that right now the Russian tactical aviation, has an advantage that they can fly close to the lines.
No, they cannot.
They can't.
No.
Okay, because
they're afraid of. Yes.
Well done. What is the range of a cob?
It also depends, different, but it's maybe 35, 55 kilometers. It depends.
But the how far can you go, like air defense wise, to threaten Russian air assets?
Our task is be situated as close as we could be to the front line to push them back. They afraid of come closer because they know that if they will come to our range, we will destroy them.
Okay.
So it's also one of the part of the work to push them back.
And the reporting now from the open source, from the media, is that the Ukrainian armed forces and the intelligence services in recent couple of months has been very effective at mid-strike,
Yes.
targeting, I think it's the 208th highway.
You mean logistics? At Crimea, right?
Yeah, in Crimea.
Yes, mostly.
And
yeah.
you guys are hitting both radars, you're hitting logistics hubs, lines of communication. So the Russians, are you seeing that on the battlefield? Is it beginning to wear on the Russians? Are they running out of supplies? Are they having a hard time resupplying their units? Or is it too early?
We'll see that in the future because it's our part, of a front line. No, I didn't. I know about the results, but as long as front line is huge, so on our front line, I wouldn't say that we have some kind of changes which was connected with that.
Okay. And how about the war in Iran? So has that had any impact on the Russians? The fact that we've been targeting Iranian defense industrial complex.
I would say mostly analytics because the war in Iran gave Russian money. We both know that they still lose the money every day and so on, so they have real economic problems. But since the Iran conflict, they could retrieve some of their the economical loss of the last time. So that's not good for us.
Right. So due to the rise in oil prices.
Yes.
Yeah, energy
yes.
prices. So that's, and your assessment, that's an advantage for Russia. Yeah. Although you guys have also been doing a great job targeting deep strikes, targeting their oil and gas infrastructure. And my understanding is that's also made it very difficult for them to take advantage in the way that they could have maybe a year ago. So again, that's completely Ukrainian done and pretty impressive. Some of the units that have been responsible for that. Going back to the air defense, what do you see the future? I mean, what would your recommendation be to your counterpart, let's say in a U.S. military unit, an air defense officer? What should they be thinking about?
Depth in. They should be as mobile as they can and real quick. This is the main thing, the main goal of modern military, because since even 2022 we have few, at least few, this evolutionary steps in the modern war. So in 2022 we didn't have UAVs. After that, they Mavics as one of the part of reconnaissance, modern reconnaissance. After that, UAV which could go on the middle strike and the barrage missiles. So it changes, and it changes very, very quick. So you should react also as soon as possible on all the threats it could create.
Many experts talk about how incredible the innovation cycle is here in Ukraine, how engineers are working on the front
You see,
lines.
the thing is, here in Ukraine, that mostly military innovations in the modern countries, they go from up. So country, some big company or military, as staff military, they understand what they want. So they create a program, they create a bureaucracy, they create an economy, and trying to create something which would be the game changer. So this is how it was mostly in the world. In Ukraine, it works completely different way. So we create all of those innovation from the front line, so from below, because only those guys who on the front line as themselves, only they knew what what material, what weapon should they have.
Right.
So they tell what we need, and they go to up, and only there, then the governmental can do their work. So it's completely different.
One of the things I've observed with other officers from your unit is that from the Third Corps is that the command encourages that kind of thinking from below,
Yes.
leadership from below. They're
Yeah.
not suppressing it. There's not a lot of like subordination, maybe in the traditional military sense, which my own assessment is that's why you're so successful.
This
Because-
this is the reason, and it's also one of difference between us and Russians, because Russians, as you know, they're a post-Soviet country. In the Soviet military, they have such a phrase that initiative.
Kazumi is punishable.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
initiative is punishable,
punishable.
and mostly they still think in that way.
Yes. Well, by the way, in my family, I also have that policy, but that's different. Joking. Okay, so your advice would be then to your American counterparts or your counterparts in NATO, you need to be ready to adapt very quickly. You said that you need to be ready for mobile air defense.
And I thinking about one more thing. I suppose I know. Just I analyzed different campaigns of American army. He should be ready that war would be dirty, very dirty, and without any rules, and it will be really the dirty thing.
That's a great point. I mean, sometimes I think people in the West, people in America think that there are rules. They want there to be rules of engagement. There, the laws of war, which is noble. But what you're saying is you're facing an enemy that does not pay attention to any of those rules. So they're brutal. Yeah, that is definitely something we need to remember. How about just as a Ukrainian? One of the things that amazes me about this country is the resilience. This morning the city was hit with multiple strikes. I was awoken to air defense activity, and then I looked out the window of my hotel. Probably shouldn't have done that, but I saw one of the strikes. You could see the smoke bellowing from a target that was hit, and yet people are driving. They're walking on the street. They're going to work. Nothing stops people. And by the way, if the Russians are listening, I keep saying this. I don't see any indication. I've been traveling to Ukraine now for 3 years since I retired from the government. And I see no indication that the Ukrainian people are ready to surrender, that they're going to surrender, that this terrorism that Putin is trying to lay upon the people is having any effect. It's almost having the opposite effect. Where does this resilience come from? And what should Americans learn, too, about resilience from what you know?
That's a hard question, really hard question, because I don't think I have an answer. Try to think about it. But also one of the things you mentioned about my own city, Odessa. It's before war. I mean, big war, 2022. It was mostly, as we could say, pro-Russian, because they mostly Russian speaking and so on, so on, so on. Pre-Russian history and so on. But all of those strikes, they have the opposite, result, as the Russians could expect a bit, because people of Odessa right now mostly hates the Russian. So it's really have a positive effect that they could expect about it. Why? I think partly of history, because Ukraine almost all time at wars, and also Ukraine wanted freedom all the time and fight for it and receive it only in 1991 in light way. But right now, I suppose we paying some kind of a price. If you want to be free, independent, have something you want, so you have to fight for it, and maybe in the long term it is good, because you can only keep something, protect something, if you pay the price for it.
Right. The Russians claim that the Maidan was organized by America by the CIA, by the people of Ukraine were manipulated. They actually want to be part of Russia, or at least closer to Russia, but that the United States and the European Union, falsely created this narrative that Russia was bad. But what you're saying is people are willing to fight for their freedom.
Yeah.
Even the Russian speakers here are angry. I've had many tell me that they'll never forgive Russia for what they've done.
Yes.
I was in Kharkiv last year, and there was a cafe downtown that had been struck by a missile,
Yeah.
and all the signs said come in and have coffee in Russian. And I find it ironic that these are the people that Putin said he was liberating.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
killing, right? But this narrative, you were part of the young generation, when you were in school, and then when before you went in 2014 to defend your country, that was making changes in Ukraine. For this Russian narrative, is there any truth to that? Do you think? Do you feel like Ukraine was manipulated or tricked by the West?
No, because I saw, and I could remember and have some my own opinion about the Orange Revolution. So after that, Maidan also was one of the activists of Maidan, and not because I wanted to go to European Union, because in Odessa, in the first meetings, police also tried to kick us out, and one of them hit me in the head, and I don't like when someone hit me in the head for no reason. So for me, it was, like, no, I don't want to live in the country in which some big men could shut your mouth and said, go do something I want. I don't like that. So it was, it's also about independence, not about some European Union activists. It was also about independence. We don't want to live in the country in like Russia. We are not slaves.
This is an incredible feeling every time you as an American, when I come to Ukraine. It's inspiring because I meet people like you who talk about and are basically living this ethos that to be free, you have to fight for it. You have to struggle for it. There are people in the world that want to take that away from you. That's been throughout history. No democracy, no society has ever been able to live without war, the threat of people trying to steal their liberty, destroy their culture. And the Ukrainian people are setting such a great example for everybody, including, I have to be honest, in the United States, where I think many Americans have forgotten
Yes.
the roots of our history, who we are. We were once a very, very resilient country. Americans were willing to accept any sacrifice, any hardship for liberty. For the first immigrants that came to the United States and that settled the West, that settled parts of the United States, they suffered incredibly. I mean, it was very, very hard. So this is my last question. And then if you have any questions for me, I'll be happy to answer them. But don't ask me about art because I'm not very good about that. But actually, I should ask you two more questions. My first question is, unfortunately, the sense I get, I've been here in two conferences, one in Odessa and then one here in Kiev, is there's a sense that Ukrainians feel that the United States has just forgotten them, that the United States is not helping anymore, is not going to help. Is that true? I mean, do you feel that? And what would you tell the Americans that are going to watch this podcast about the importance of what you're doing and what you're fighting for?
Also, a hard question. I can explain why. Because I may consider it as, for me as a person, or as for me as a person who trying to analyze, geopolitical some things, threats, and so on. So, as for me as a person, yes, I would like to have as much help, support as we can. But on the other hand, anyone should help us if we didn't make our success before. We have some time since 1991 till 2014. So I would gladly receive any help.
Mm-hmm.
But if not like a personal, and just from analysts, нам ничего не должны.
We don't owe you anything.
Yes.
Nobody owes Ukraine anything.
Yes. So if Ukraine shows itself as a strong partner in the future, that would be great. So it would interest some other countries in some kind of alliances in the future. But as you said, I don't think someone owns us something. We need to change things by ourselves and considered our own, strength
Right.
to do this.
Well, I have to disagree with you, artist, because one, I'll just give a very practical example. When the United States went to war against Iran, or actually, in my opinion, the Iranians declared war on the United States in 1979, this Islamic regime, when President Trump finally decided to take action on a large scale against the Iranian regime, many of our European partners turned their backs on us, or they didn't
Yes.
want to join. Ukraine was one of the first countries, maybe the first country in Europe, and definitely the most active European country to come to our assistance. And President Zelensky offered assistance. He offered strong diplomatic support, which is important. And then he actually sent your colleagues, air defense experts, counter drone experts, to the Middle East to work with us and our partners in the Gulf. So while I would say I don't know if we owe you any, we do owe you something. First of all, like as an American, I'm very thankful for that, because we have Americans whose lives are in harm's way. They're being threatened by Iranian shaheeds, and Ukraine's willingness to share its expertise, its technology, to me, is very significant. And then the other thing I would say as an American, going back to this idea of sovereignty, you guys are fighting for values which we as Americans were raised to believe in. And you're on the front line. I tell this to Americans all the time. Ukraine is right now on the front line of a very large battle. I think American troops now in the Middle East and our partners are on the part of that front line as well. I see Iran and Russia as allies in their, these are two dictatorships, ruthless regimes that treat their own people terribly, and they treat people around them terribly. They're a threat to their neighbors. The Iranian regime has threatened to destroy the state of Israel. The Russian regime has threatened to destroy Ukraine as a country. The United States should support both Israel and Ukraine, in my opinion, because both Israel and Ukraine are fighting for our values and fighting to protect us. And I know this is, there's the idea of the domino theory. Some people don't believe in that, but if we let Ukraine fall to an aggressive dictator like Vladimir Putin, I think the United States will lose in many, many ways, both morally, diplomatically. The impact on the United States will be terrible. So everything that you're doing, and you and your fellow soldiers on the front and the people of Ukraine throughout society are doing, I think, is actually serving the interests of the United States, the country that I grew up in. And so for this, I think we're also, we owe a debt of gratitude, and we owe it to Ukraine to continue to support you
That's
and what you're doing.
actually what I mean, because I believe that alliances of the future, I mean, the modern global security system almost collapsed. So I believe the future alliances, as you said, it will be the alliances between the strong, not between, some kind of hegemon and satellites. No, it will be alliances between the strong. So we should consider on force to be that other partners would be interested in alliances with us.
Let's remember that, again, going back to the Iran example, while Ukraine was offering assistance to the United States, the Russians were providing intelligence data to the Iranians to target U.S. troops and our allies in the Middle East. So Americans should remember that, to anybody in the United States that thinks that Russia can be an ally or should be seen as an ally or a partner, and there are unfortunately some people in Europe and the U.S. that think that, should remember that. The lives of Americans were put at risk by the Russians, while the lives of Americans were being defended by the Ukrainians. So for this, again, I think we should be thankful, and we do have a debt of gratitude. One more question, if I can. Your call sign is artist. Who's your favorite artist? By the way, you told me too you were also a musician, so it can be any artist. Who's your favorite artist?
I would say few of them.
Okay.
As bands, I would say one of my favorites is Pink Floyd and David Gilmour, because his guitar playing is awesome. It's a completely different level. He showed that you don't have to play fast to be the best. From the modern, I would say it's Dream Theater. It's a progressive metal group. And from guitarists, I suppose T.Y. Joe Satriani, Joe Bonamassa.
How about some Ukrainian bands? Can you recommend any great Ukrainian music, like progressive rock?
Yeah, from modern, I would say it's Winter.
Winter?
I would say Karna.
Garna?
It mostly, I mean, rock or hard rock groups. So, and Yeah, that's all.
Garden, which means beautiful in Ukrainian, right?
Yeah.
Garden, yeah.
Also, I have a few questions for you.
Yes, sir.
From your opinion, why Russia started war?
My opinion, why did Russia start this war? I think because Putin is deathly afraid of freedom, the idea of freedom here in Ukraine. I think he was very afraid that it was going to spread into Russia because, you have a common history. And after 1991, when Ukraine got its independence, the Russians for years used their, what we call, the term active measures to try and control Ukraine politically, diplomatically, keep Ukraine as part of Russia's alliance, an alliance with Russia, so that Russia could continue to dictate to the Ukrainians how they can live, how society should develop. After the Orange Revolution and then after the Maidan, they started to lose control over that. They started to see a generation like yours that was talking about rule of law, that they wanted to be able to decide what language to speak, what religion, what faith to believe in. And most importantly, that they didn't want people that just some big guy, as you said, to come with a stick and be able to beat you whenever they wanted and beat you into submission. So I personally think that was the main motivation. Putin is deathly afraid of Ukraine's success. Ukraine, I can tell you, I was in Russia in not so distant past, and I would frequently hear Russians tell me, why are the Ukrainians allowed to elect their leaders, especially when President Zelensky was elected, but we can't elect our leader? We're told who has to rule us. Why are the Ukrainians able to become part of Europe, and yet we're stuck being allies with Iran and North Korea? So I think Putin and his security services understood the threat that Ukraine, as a free nation, represented to their hold on power. And of course, historically, the Russians, I say this all the time, the Russians are extremely afraid of the outside world, and they're afraid of the threat. They create this threat in their minds that Europe and the United States is going to, NATO is going to attack Russia, and they see Ukraine as a buffer zone. And they think that it's their right to keep Ukraine as this buffer zone between them and Europe, instead of understanding that if they had treated Ukraine differently, Ukraine could be a bridge between Europe and Russia, and they could be living a lot better. Today, life in Russia is worse than it was 10 years ago. It's worse than it was when Putin invaded Crimea, invaded the East. So the Russians haven't benefited at all from this war. The only person that's benefiting is Putin and maybe the people around him, because they've been able to hold on to power by creating this false narrative that there's a threat from Ukraine. So I think those are the two main reasons, but most of all, I think he's just afraid of freedom. And you can feel the sense of freedom here. You're one of many, many people I've met here who are willing to fight. There have been people that have laid down their lives for their freedom and for the freedom for their children to have that freedom. And, I think there are probably Russians that want that. They see it. They want to have it, but guys like Putin will never want them to have it, because that just undermines their ability to amass wealth and dictate to everyone in the country how they should live. And so as an American, I always say, I used to tell the Russians all the time, if you want to live with a guy like Vladimir Putin, that's your business. But the United States should always stand with those countries on your periphery, on your border, that want to make a different choice, and we should support them in their choice and not allow them. This idea that this is Russia's sphere of influence is nonsense. We shouldn't have spheres of influence like that, in my opinion. So I hope I answered your question.
Also, have one of opinion is, I told you before, modern global security system, it's almost collapsed. You can, be dependent of United Nations from now on. And as for me, it's like modern global system, it's creating right now. I mean, the real modern system. And all of the deeds, last time since not maybe even 2014, it's about 24. I mean, when they invaded Georgia, is about to find their place as one of the hegemons of the future. Because as you saw, they show the world that we could destroy all of your rules, all of United Nation rules about the borders and so on, so on, so on, and you can do it, could do nothing to us.
Right.
So this is, about an influence on the world map. So they show that we could do anything and no one can do anything with us.
Right.
So I believe this is one of the biggest problem because they are not democratical country. They never were, and I don't believe they would be in some near future. So it's not about the power inside the country. It's about influence on the outside.
Right.
So this is my opinion why they do this mostly.
Right.
It's not about the threat to some kind of Eastern democratical threat which could be considered as part of threat from Ukraine. No, it's about an influence from to the outside. It is my opinion.
Well, I definitely agree with you that the global order, if there ever was a global order, by the way, is changing. As an American, we need allies. We need partners that are effective, they take action. Unfortunately, probably some in our alliances, we had some allies that for too long were very complacent, and they were very willing to, instead of investing in defense, investing in their ability to defend themselves, they were very reliant on the United States to protect them, and then they were using that money to do other things, which made Americans angry. And we see that today in some of the polling in the U.S., and probably why right now we have a very fragile relationship with our NATO partners, because there are many Americans who felt that we were being used for years by European countries that were living well, investing in social welfare programs and education while we were investing in their defense. Very complicated issue, and it's not black and white, cut and dry. But going back to Ukraine, this is a country that has demonstrated it is very effective on the battlefield. It's very effective in the intelligence field. I tell people all the time, if we want to manage Russia, which we have to, then we have to have Ukraine as a partner. Nobody understands the Russians better than you do. Nobody understands the language, the culture, the mentality. I worked this issue since I was probably 18 years old, 19 years old. And I tell people all the time, I don't understand anything about Russia, but our Ukrainian partners do. And we shouldn't forget that. And we just have to have partners that are willing to take risks and sacrifice to stand up for what we believe in. So our common values. And I think people in the White House, people in Congress, people throughout the United States should know that and remember it. This world is a dangerous world. As you said, we have a lot of people out there that don't play by the rules. And going forward, it's only going to get more complicated. And we're going to need, I saw this in my career. We needed really good partners. And when we had good partners, we were very successful. Ukraine is a great partner. And if I were going to invest in a partner and a friendship, this is the friendship I would invest in. And going back to Russia, if anyone thinks that Russia is going to be our friend or ally, just study U.S.-Russian relations. We've never had a strong relationship with Russia. And the best way to deal with Russia is to have partners like Ukraine, in my opinion. So this new security architecture, it's being formed right now. And as an American, I just hope that we can form it together with our Ukrainian friends.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I hope we can get your car back and get you compensated for your Mercedes. That's wrong to destroy someone's car. Americans love cars, so it's part of our culture. Well, thank you for your time. God bless you. Slava Ukraini. God bless America. And for all of our listeners and followers, and Ryan over there on the West Coast of the United States, thanks for all your support. And we'll be back to you with some more podcasts, including from here in Ukraine in the near future.
Thanks for listening and being a part of the RH community. Would you like to receive the same daily intel brief that Glenn and I read? You can get it at restrictedhandling.com. We've curated what we consider to be the most relevant and reputable sources on all things international security, geopolitics, military and intel ops, and economics and sanctions, focused exclusively on Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and the Middle East, to include accompanying podcasts for Russia, China, economics, and spy stories. Just head to restrictedhandling.com, enter your email, and you'll get the daily briefs that Glenn and I both read, and you can leave comments and questions that we can respond to. Thanks again for listening. Stay safe.